Hey team, it's Mayhem. You know, Robin Hood is a tale as old as time, and few stories will make you want to knock a bow quite like that. Well, that gag's out, but I'm keeping it because I bought the bow. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was released on the NES by Virgin Games, later known as Virgin Interactive Entertainment, a video game publishing and development team that became well known for their work in the gaming industry. They have quite a long list of games they have worked on, including Prince of Persia and Earthworm Jim. They even scored a partnership with Disney in the early 90s, which led to them bringing up such gems as The Lion King and Aladdin. The game opens with Robin caught in an Arab dungeon, where Robin can see his friend Peter being interrogated vigorously by a guard. Conveniently, however, someone left a sword over here, so we can grab that and end the guard quickly. After freeing Peter, we can make our way to our new friend here, Azim. After grabbing a nearby spare key, we're introduced to a new style of combat, a one-on-one style duel. Now, before we get too far into things, I want to talk briefly about the different types of combat in this game. There's the action RPG style that is used mostly, which is what we see at the beginning. We've got these 1v1 duels, large battles that take place in a small static area that feature the entire team, and although it's not really a type of combat, there are horseback chase scenes. The 1v1 fights are pretty simplistic. You can move left or right, jump, and do this excessively realistic roll. When attacking, Robin stops moving for the duration of the attack, which can lead to standoffs with neither combatant wanting to get too close. These large-scale fights are an interesting way, I think, to get the whole party involved in battle. Outside of these fights, your allies feel more like mules just to carry items. While these fights with enemies constantly rushing you don't tend to last very long, it is important to try and do well in these. You can see your party member's HP at the bottom of the screen, and you and your allies can take a ton of damage here, especially since your comrades are sometimes idiots. They just walk into a volley of arrows. Now, I've got to say, I think this game leans into the action-style combat really well. While there may not be a ton of variety in the weapons, there are enough to keep the fluid combat interesting when a new weapon type is introduced. Also, you better get used to how Robin moves around and bounces off things, since this is the primary style of combat you'll see. Now, getting back to the duel, this guy can actually defeat you easily if you aren't careful. I tend to duck and let him approach so I can sneak in a quick hit here and there. It usually works well enough to get past this guy. After our victory, we snag a torch off the guard's body and find our escape in the southeast corner of the room. Moving on, we find ourselves escaping through some catacombs under the dungeon. This is where we get our first real taste of the action RPG style combat. Heading through the narrow corridors to the north, we encounter some guards along the way. Eventually, this will lead us to our first large-scale battle. Now, in this particular fight, I've never found any enemies to use bows, so I found this one to be pretty easy. With the battle won, we find that Peter has suffered a mortal wound during the battle and cannot go on with the group. Peter gives Robin a ring and has him swear that he'll deliver the ring to his sister and protect her. Upon Robin's oath, the group leaves hastily without Peter. We cut to a new section of the game, with Robin promising Azim they will soon be home. However, there is dirty work afoot. Robin quickly learns that Guy of Gisborne is terrorizing the area and is running his deeds essentially unchecked. Shortly after, we have the pleasure of meeting Guy and having a large-scale fight with him and his team. Now, this fight is vastly more dangerous than the first one. Some of these guys have bows and will stop and just turret at you and your men if you're not careful. Be sure not to run straight at them. They can only shoot on 8 axes, and you can exploit this to still win these fights easily. Your allies may not always be so smart, however. With the battle won, Guy escapes but swears his vengeance against Robin for interfering. I'm gonna take a moment to point out that the ground in most of these areas can be littered with items that you can pick up along the way. As far as I can tell, most of these items are static and seem to be there every time, although some enemies do leave behind items or a body that can be searched for more loot. Speaking of loot, the inventory management screen wasn't super unique at the time and seemed to want to emulate early PC RPGs. This worked alright on the Nintendo, allowing you to equip items, eat food, use and examine items. In my opinion, it works pretty decently until later in the game, when the party becomes larger and moving items around becomes a bit more painful. Not to mention that you'll have some key items later that'll eat up some inventory slots. Robin comes most jubilantly to his home, again promising Azim of a warm bed and more. Much to his surprise, however, he finds his father dead and mounted above the entrance to the castle. Entering the castle, we find it overrun by cats, rats, and bats? I'm not really sure what these cat things are. The castle looks run down and destroyed on the inside, and it seems apparent that the castle was ransacked. We find a man named Duncan, who to me seems delirious, and this leads to Robin becoming furious. Luckily, the ever level-headed Azim calms Robin by pointing out that Duncan has been blinded. Duncan joins the party and helps Azim and the saddened Robin tend to the burial of Robin's father. Upon finishing the task, the group heads west to fulfill Robin's promise to Peter. A brief stroll through the forest leads us to Dubois Manor. We pet the pretty ponies and approach the guard that bids us welcome. Inside, we're treated to a moment of peace as we search around, eventually finding Marion herself. We fulfill our promise to Peter and also find out that the sheriff and Guy are free to do as they please lately due to the king being away on crusades. As we're developing a plan to use the Sherwood Forest to make camp, guards storm the castle. We take Marion's advice and pretend to steal her saddle and 2 of her horses. This part of the game is quite unforgiving. If you make even the slightest mistake, it's just death instantly. I feel like this part of the game is the whole reason you get a couple of continues. Although this section is harsh, it is at least over quickly should you succeed. We make our way into the depths of the Sherwood Forest, and we come to John Little's Bridge of Extortion. This leads us into a one-on-one fight with Mr. Little himself. Now, I gotta warn you, he has a ton of HP, so it's definitely wise to heal up before engaging him. I do find it interesting that his stick has as much reach as my sword, but you know, whatever. Once we've won the fight, we take just a moment to make fun of John briefly, and then we join his gang in the camp to the north of the forest. At the camp, if that's even what you want to call this place, we are accosted by a gentleman claiming his wife has been abducted by the Baron and is being forced into a marriage with him. He says there is evidence on the 2nd floor of the cathedral, and upon hearing this, Robin and his band of merry men are free to leave the camp towards our next destination. After a short trip through the forested area, we come to the cathedral. This cathedral just looks a wee bit too similar to all the castles we've been to before, if you ask me. Once inside, if you head off to the right, you'll find a little staircase here. Now, right near the start of the 2nd floor area, there's a very unexpected large-scale battle randomly in a hallway here, although honestly, I kinda like it. In this case, I really like that the game doesn't just telegraph that this fight is coming. It is a short little fight, but you and your comrades can get wrecked by the archer enemies, so beware for that. I love that the music in this section gets so cut into by the action, especially by these arrows. Speaking of arrows, these narrow corridors are awful if you aren't careful. Also, this leg of meat over here is just a trap. Upon finding this letter from the Baron, we can confront him downstairs on the 1st floor. You may want to heal up before approaching the Baron, as it is also a 1v1 fight, though I do find this fight way easier than the battle with John Little. After winning, the Baron claims he'll get his vengeance and scurries off with his tail between his legs. And with the wedding successfully prevented, we're free to leave and head back to camp at our leisure. At camp, we find the men working on building tree huts, and we're told of another incident that for some reason needs Robin's immediate attention. Robin, you've got to come quick! Something terrible's happened! You know, I would love to, but honestly, I'm just a little bit busy at the moment. Can't someone else deal with this? What? No! A nearby wild boar is causing havoc, and apparently no one else can do anything about it except for Ramid, so here we go. We leave camp, and we find ourselves in a section of the forest that has these goofy-looking boars. They aren't all that tough, and this area is actually pretty short to get through. As we find a small cave, we can enter and find the boss of all the boars. His large size makes him somewhat easy to hit, though his face doesn't really seem to be a great part of his hitbox, so hitting him from the side is usually the best bet. Once you've failed this fearsome foe, you can now search the corpse to find what is arguably the best weapon in the game, the Locksley bow. Not really sure why the bow is named that, but it can be equipped in one hand, making it an excellent weapon. Back at camp, we're told of a woodsman that has gone missing in a haunted section of the woods. Robin scoffs at this claim and vows to find the woodsman himself. Searching south of the camp, we come across the missing woodsman. But more importantly, we find a well. Robin mentions that we should explore it a little bit further, and fortunately enough for us, there's a rope just to the east that we can pick up to assist us. The inside of the well looks just like the caverns at the start of the game, and also just like those caverns, you'll find your way forward to the north. At the end of the underground cavern, we come across Mortania. A character that we haven't met before. She tells us that she's guarding the sheriff, and that she has a druid guarding her. She does give us a vital clue though. There is a weapon that can defeat her guardian, but we don't have it yet. And with no other choice, we flee for now. After another short stint in camp, Duncan informs us that we need to leave immediately to meet with Marion at a chapel to the south. How does Duncan know this? You know what? I don't even know. After a brief walk through the forest, we finally come across a small chapel that, amazingly, doesn't look just like the rest of the castles we've seen up until now. It's very small inside compared to the other castles. Speaking to Marion, she tells us that she stole a very important dagger called the Druid's Dagger from the sheriff. She doesn't know what it's for, but I bet we do. She warns us that the sheriff is evil and stuff because he's evil. Yeah, whatever. We head back to camp. Once back in camp, we hear news that the sheriff's tax wagons are rolling through nearby, so naturally we rush out to claim it for ourselves. We actually come across Guy guarding his prize quite quickly. As we engage him, he taunts us that he will use the sword that belonged to Robin's father to cut Robin down. Obviously we can't have that, nor can we have him owning that sword. After what's honestly a relatively easy 1v1 duel with Guy, he is defeated. After we collect our prize, Friar Tuck joins our band of merry men as we head back to camp. Surprisingly, Marion awaits us back at camp. She tells us that she's come to collect Duncan, and as she does so, she bids us farewell. We're told that things are going smoothly in camp thus far, but the men lack real combat training. We're then asked to recruit us a weapons master to train the camp. This section of the forest is especially painful, as it seems that many of the average enemies you'll face here have bows, and you can easily take a ton of damage from these guys. You'll certainly want to keep your HP up though as you find the weapons master. He'll only accept your offer to train the camp if you can defeat him in a duel. This fight isn't all that hard, and if you can get him to jump backwards up onto this rock in the back, he'll be way too high up to strike you, and you'll have an easy time. After pillaging our new instructor's cabin, we head back to camp to find yet another disaster has struck. Because, of course it has. The men are sick and unable to work, but they have heard of a mystical pond with healing properties. So naturally, we go to try to find this pond. Of course, this wouldn't be a little side quest without the pond being infested with some goofy-looking monsters that can shoot arrows at you. I'm not really sure what these guys are, but they do have a lot of hit points and can be somewhat frustrating to take out. It's possible to hit them with melee attacks, though this can be rough if more than one of them attack you at a time. When you finally defeat the last one, the putrid pond clears up and becomes a crystal clear spring of health. If you have any flasks in your inventory, you can fill them with the water and then use them to restore 100 HP. We return to camp again to find that the Baron we fought previously is now heading to a small village to raid it, and thus we once again run off to play hero. After a jolly trot through the forest, we find ourselves in a rather unique looking area. It's a village of houses and it seems like you can go into all of them. Many of the homes have nothing of value, but few do have items, including this ball and chain. This item can do devastating damage, but is very heavy and can slow your movement a fair bit. There's also one house that has a lady inside, and she'll sell you a chest key for only 20 GP. Roaming around, we find we've entered another large-scale battle. And you do well to try to keep your health up during this, as the Baron awaits for you in a one-on-one duel following directly after this battle. Technically, you have a chance to heal up afterwards, but if you're standing too close to him, you'll enter into a brief back-and-forth banter between the two of you, and you'll agree once and for all to end it here. He doesn't have much health and is honestly pretty easily defeated. And with Robin victorious, the village is saved, and you're free to head back to camp. Again, back at camp, a very frantic Duncan returns to tell you that the sheriff has attacked Du Bois Manor and took Marion with the plan of marrying her. However, in his haste to find Robin with this warning, he has led the sheriff's men right to the camp. Even after winning the ensuing large-scale fight, John mentions that they have set fire to the trees and for now, the party must retreat. After fleeing, we find ourselves in an area of the forest that looks very similar to the Weapon Master's hut. If you search this hut and the well nearby, you can find several hidden items hidden inside. And those items will serve you well, as this area is rather intense, filled with a lot of enemy archers. As we make our way back, we find our camp ablaze and in shambles. There's not really much to camp this time, only the gentleman in the middle that you can talk to. He tells you that some of your men were taken and will soon hang if they aren't quickly saved. Of course, hearing this, the party rushes off to save the men and fight in the final showdown. In this section of the forest, there are also a ton of guards that can spawn, and it can get dicey pretty quickly if you aren't careful. There's a saddle along the way that you can find also, just in case you drop the one you had previously. In the southern area of the forest, you'll come across some ponies that you can saddle up and ride into town with. We're finally there. It's finally time to storm the town and the castle. If you picked up a disguise, you can wear it here to avoid some fighting, but you'll still have to attack the guard at the castle in order to get in. After a large-scale battle, your team will mention that it's time to storm the castle before any more guards show up. Moving inside, Friar comments that the area reeks of an evil stench. Now this area is huge, by the way, with tons of guards and even other large battles inside as you approach the northeast side of the castle. The sequences here can quickly eat up your healing resources if you aren't careful, and you do have 2 boss fights at the end of this area. I do kind of hesitate to call the druid that you fight a boss, because while he is technically a boss with his own HP bar, he's not all that threatening. You might take a few hits as you get up close to wail on him with the druid's dagger, but other than that, he's not so bad. Without the druid protecting her, Mortiana soon follows the same fate as the druid, leaving us finally with one last deed. Just ahead, we finally find the sheriff himself, and with no more walls to hide behind, Robin engages him in a one-on-one duel. While the fight with the sheriff can be kinda tough, as he does have a fair amount of HP, if you use all the skills you've learned up until now, it shouldn't be all that bad. Upon emerging victorious, Robin has now completed his vow and avenged his father. The game gets really cheesy here. Robin and Marian hold a little wedding of their own later, and with just the perfect timing, the king steps in like Shrek and interrupts the wedding. He states that he cannot allow the wedding to go forward without his blessing. And then we get the most amazing animation. You know, team, Robin Hood for the NES does have some flaws, but really, I think it's one of the hidden gems of the NES era. It's pretty ambitious, but pulls off a lot of what it's trying to do pretty well, I think. Although I gotta say, I just can't get over that cheesy ending. In fact, I'm pretty sure I could do it better. Hey team, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in more, I've done this playthrough of Sweet Home. Or if a live setting's more your speed, maybe you'll be interested in this other video. Thanks, and see you next time.